The reason that I had asked you to do this, it feels like 3 weeks ago, which is really like 3 days ago, is the Ivy League's decision was going to be made, and I want to talk about it after the decision was made. And they obviously decided to cancel fall sports. They're going to do their fall sports in the spring and figure that out. But since then, the Big Ten has come out with, hey, we're only playing conference games this season, and they did it on July 8th, and there's been some consternation about that. We expect the Pac-12 to follow through. There are varying reports about whether or not the ACC is going to do it, but there's no vote that's been held. The SEC is holding pat, or standing pat. The Big 12 is standing pat. What do you see, man? I mean, I'm not asking you to predict the future here, but it feels like a slow breakup with a girlfriend.
Yeah, this all feels really pretty inevitable to me. And I think it's a product of some of these administrators and some of these conferences being really reluctant to take bold action earlier. And now you're basically running out of time. I mean, in April and May, the kind of consensus was, hey, we just think things are going to get better, and we'll make changes if we have to. And now you have to.
Yeah.
And looking at the immediate future, I think you're going to begin to see some more movement at the FCS level pretty quickly. Because if you have major conferences that are deciding we're not going to play bye games, and you are a team in the Big South or the Big Sky or some of these other FCS leagues that depend on that $650,000 check to play the Big Ten team in the beginning of the year, and now the Ivies are saying it's not safe, it's going to be really hard for you to keep playing. So I look at these next couple of weeks, everyone's going to be looking at the SEC and the Big 12, but I think they have the political stability and incentives to kind of hold pat for a little bit. But if you're the Patriot League, if you're the Pioneer League, if you're the MEAC, if you're the SWAC, and they've already canceling some of the classic games, yeah, I think that you're gonna look to post things to spring, or at least cancel things for now relatively quickly. And it's going to get more challenging for anybody that's relying on anybody else for your money right now.
To that end, Oklahoma is looking to move its Week 1 game, September 5th, against Missouri State to August 29th, to Week 0, as they call it. And they're seeking a waiver. No guarantee that they get the waiver, but we've seen them extend that waiver for, say, Miami, Florida, so that they can help celebrate the 150th anniversary of college football last year. Same thing with Hawaii, because they're trying to get one more game in to help offset some costs. Missouri State plays in that Missouri Valley Conference that is, got a bunch of just powerhouses in it, among them North Dakota State, right, who's looking to defend a national championship. And I have been of two minds on this. One, I know the kids want to play football, and ultimately I believe it's their decision whether or not they want to play football. On my end, I'm going, if they don't want to play, then we're not going to play. And I can only imagine how Missouri State players must feel about, we're gonna truck down there to basically get our heads kicked in so you can get $650,000 in front of nobody, and then we're gonna get trucked back at a time when we're not sure you can keep us safe, even as testing is what testing is. I feel the moral outcomes of this are not being taken as seriously as the financial outcomes.
Dude, I totally agree, right? We look at what's happening with the professional leagues, the NBA, MLS, women's professional soccer, and you're having athletes test positive and have to be removed. And these are athletes that are, one, highly compensated, and two, have collective bargaining so they can literally help negotiate how much risk they're willing to tolerate and be compensated for that risk. And for college, not only do the kids not get any money, the kids don't really get any say in what kind of risk they're going to be taking. And what makes this Oklahoma and Southeast Missouri situation, the Missouri State situation, so confusing to me is because, one, playing that game isn't going to be profitable anyway, because best case scenario, Oklahoma's only going to sell 25% of their tickets. And I'm sure they'll be able to sell those, but the whole point of playing an FCS team is to sell out the stadium. You're not going to be able to do that. The game itself is going to be terrible. This is Bobby Petrino's first game. They're going to lose by 50. But the other big thing is that you can't guarantee the same standard of testing, of sanitization, and of reporting between those two different schools. This is actually one of the bigger reasons the Big Ten decided to go conference only, is so they can have that kind of unified mandate and control what the testing is going to look like. So now Oklahoma is potentially coming in here bringing in a bunch of football players from a school that doesn't have anywhere near as much money, will probably not be testing as often, will probably not be sanitizing as often, and then have them breathe on their football players for 2 hours. If I was an Oklahoma football player, I would be really angry about that. And that exact dynamic is why, one, I'd be very surprised that football game is played, and why I would expect the Pac-12 and some of these other leagues to move away from that, because that's an enormous amount of risk for not very much reward. Nobody's really going to complain if you cancel that game.
I asked that question of reporting and others that I know that are on the beat, that cover the beat, and the thinking there is Joe Castiglione, athletic director at Oklahoma, and Missouri State are in lockstep in how they are testing, but to the point of how are we sure that they are actually going through the same sanitation that the University of Oklahoma does, and we know that the University of Oklahoma pulls in about $190 million a year, right? That ain't Missouri State, right? So I can't expect them to also be able to do what Oklahoma is able to do. I'm also really interested in this idea of how much is it gonna, what is it gonna take for public opinion to change this, because that's what it was, right? When we were able to shut it down the first time, it was enough people that said, hey, this is actually bad, and if you don't do something, it's going to consume us. To which we had mayors, governors, business folks say, okay, we're going to economically tank ourselves so that we can protect people, which is the right thing to do, especially for a long term. And yet we have much crying, gnashing of the teeth, of which I'm one, but I'm also staying at my house, right? On the other hand, I'm thinking, CBS Sports Dennis Dodd had this great story about what could happen, and he talked to a University of Illinois professor who ran the numbers and said, hey, if you do this, somebody is going to die. And if you have a child that dies on your watch, we're all not coming back from that. Like, you're definitely not coming back from it. But I imagine somebody gets so sick, somebody gets so injured, say October, that we have to shut down football altogether. And then we have to deal with the moral outcomes of, hey, we could have stopped this by just collectively saying, maybe not. And, like you and I think we need to say this. We love college football. That's what we're here for, right? And yet we're also saying, I want people to be okay.
Yeah, and what's so frustrating from looking at all of this is I feel like both within universities and in public opinion, there's this idea that the outcomes for COVID are binary. You either die or you don't. And if you're a 22-year-old athlete, you're not going to die. Like, that's one of the few things we know. Like, the odds of you dying from this, if you're a college student, particularly a really in shape one, are very, very low. What we don't know is literally anything else. We don't really know if this has long-term impact on your lungs. There's certainly some preliminary studies that suggest that it does, which is a big deal if you are a football player and suddenly have 6 months a year with diminished lung capacity. We have preliminary studies that say this could lead to long-term, potentially permanent sensory decay. It could lead to potential brain damage. It can make you immunocompromised. Those are all huge things, and there's huge risks that we can't really expect 19 or 20-year-olds to properly place. And it's really unfortunate because if you're an athletic director, you might be thinking, hey, I'm here for 6 years. And if I play this game now, we get money, I get praised for it. And if somebody comes and sues me a little bit while longer, I'm on my next gig. Like, the people that made this decision might not necessarily be responsible for it later on. So it's not a great situation for the kids. It's not a great situation for some of these schools too, where they're really being caught in this gross decision here, where I think they'd probably like to not have football, especially at the presidential level, because there's so many unknowns and uncertainties. But there's an enormous financial and political incentive to keep doing it. It's not an accident that it was the Ivies that did this first, where one, they've already got more money than God, and two, they have their alumni, their boosters, the people connected to it. They're not invested in football the same way. They're going to give them coverage to make an unpopular athletic decision. You do this. I'm from Columbus, right? And it's the same thing here for you. You do this for Ohio State or Oklahoma football right now, there's a mob. Yeah. They're going to eat you alive. And even if the president of Oklahoma realizes, hey, this is really risky, is he willing to torpedo his career over it? Is he willing to use all of his political capital on it? It's a hard decision. People have lost jobs over this kind of thing here before. That's why That's why I think a lot of these athletic directors are mad at the Big Ten for forcing their hand, and they're kind of mad at the Ivy League because they want as many other people to do this first so they don't have to take responsibility for these tough decisions.
I look at the Ivy Leagues, and there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it as canary in the coal mine, a harbinger of what is to come, especially knowing that they were the first to say, hey, guess what we're not doing? Playing basketball. You guys do what you want. And the other way is to look at it in the way that you just put it, which is they have their money is tied up in their academic standing and their endowment, not in how they play a particular sport. But then looking at Stanford, which is very fond of winning the Director's Cup, I believe it's 25 times in a row they've won that thing for overall athletic excellence because they can do everything well, from wrestling to women's volleyball to men's volleyball to sailing to football. And now they've cut 11 of those 36 sports that they used to have. That said, how much of this is a money play disguised as the COVID forced it? Because I'm looking at them, and that's like $26.5 billion, and you're telling me that you're looking to save $70 million?
No, not even that. So let's talk a little bit about Stanford specifically here.
Okay.
So one, I think there's a little bit of a common misconception when you look at a university's endowment and you see this gargantuan number, and you assume that therefore they have limited resources. Like Stanford, a very rich institution, fourth largest endowment in the country, largest endowment of any single FBS institution. It's over $200 billion. But I can tell you, bare minimum, 80% of that endowment, untouchable, right? Once, like Stanford's legally not allowed to touch it because it might be earmarked for the engineering bill.
Oh my God! You wrote about this on your on the newsletter because you talked to a dude. Okay, I remember. I'm like, you're jogging my memory. I'm sorry.
We can link to it in there. I did a whole interview with somebody with an expert at the Chronicle of Higher Ed back in April.
Okay.
So most of that's untouchable. Okay. And then even the stuff that is technically touchable, it might not be liquid. So somebody like Stanford, they're going to have their endowment tied up in super expensive Bay Area real estate. You're going to have some of the stuff in commodities futures. You're going to have some of the stuff tied into financial instruments you can't just sell, especially because the economy is in the toilet. Right. So a lot of that's theoretical money. Okay. Then you get into athletics here. The thing that's difficult for Stanford is that they were running the second largest athletic department in the country. They sponsor more sports than anybody but Ohio State. But they don't have Ohio State money. Ohio State has the gigantic Big Ten television contract. The Pac-12 has Larry Scott. You got a TV network that makes no money. Stanford doesn't really have fans. I say that like not to be mean, but there's nobody who went to Palo Alto High and is just like, yeah, I went to Chico State, but I'm a diehard Stanford fan. Like that guy doesn't exist. That guy's everywhere in Oklahoma. Right. It's not really a thing. Like they don't sell that many tickets. So then you're trying to run an Ohio State-sized department on a much smaller budget, and so many of those sports that Stanford's sponsoring right now, nobody else in the West plays them. Like they had a wrestling team. There's like 3 teams in California that sponsor wrestling. They're doing matches in Arkansas. They're doing matches in the Midwest because there's just not teams. There's only like 2 or 3 field hockey teams on the West Coast. It's almost completely an East Coast sport. So I think Stanford was looking to readjust the size of their athletic department before Rona, and when Corona happened, that gave them an excuse to do that quicker. And I think you've seen that with a couple of the other sports that are being cut. But if we don't have fall sports, everybody's going to have to start making some really tough calls. Like we're seeing some people that do have money, Vanderbilt, Florida State, this week. I think later this month there's going to be a few more of schools that are going to be laying off athletic staff. They're going to be laying off communication staff, people who work in these athletic departments, trainers, sports communication personnel. Like these are people that will lose jobs. So all of this, some of this is the money play. Some of this is schools trying to recalibrate what they're offering for a smaller, maybe more, regional kind of athletic world. And if we're looking at a year where there's no fall sports football revenue coming in, that hurts everybody. And it's going to hurt them in different ways. It means something different for Stanford. It means something different for Tulsa. It means something different for Bowling Green. But everybody's going to be hurt, and it's going to force some really difficult conversations.
Well, and I want to touch on this, right, which is the group of 5 teams in particular, because I think that there are the same number of folks that root for Cincinnati, they root for Stanford. That's more shade to Stanford than it is Cincinnati, but it is to kind of outline.
Honestly, there's more Cincinnati fans.
Okay.
But yeah, like similar phylum.
So them not being able to play Nebraska and probably get a win right, is a big deal this year. But also, they've already decided that men's soccer's gone. And I know that the University of Tulsa does not have a money game on the schedule this year that they have budgeted for. But I really worry about what's going to happen with the group of 5 teams, like a Bowling Green State, who was looking forward to the Ohio State game. Yes, beat the hell out of us. Yeah. We get to make our budget work this year. And now what are we going to see in the fallout there? Are we going to see football programs dry up in places that we know about, like the American, Conference USA, WAC, Mountain West?
Yeah, at the FCS level, I think that's possible. Okay. So for all these group of 5 schools are going to be facing pressures in two directions right now. Okay. On the athletic side, you're absolutely right. Like almost everybody, not Tulsa this year, but almost everybody has a buy game where you're making between $900,000 and $1.8 million to come and get beat up by somebody over the course of the season. And I talked to a couple of legal experts over the past couple of days, and it's not clear. It's going to depend a lot on the state and a lot on the contract, whether they're going to be able to get that money anyway. I imagine the big schools are going to try to claim force majeure and say, well, act of God, pandemic happened, we can't play your game. Mm-hmm. And then the little school is going to say, yeah, but you didn't cancel all the games. Mm-hmm. You just canceled ours. That's not an act of God. That's an act of you being broke. You pay me. And so then what happens is you either sue, which takes a couple of years and will nuke relationships between the schools. That's what happened with Miami and Arkansas State a few years ago. Or you negotiate. So what will probably happen for Bowling Green, what will probably happen for Weber State, what will probably happen for these other smaller schools is the big school says, hey, I'm going to give you $250,000 up front now, and I'm going to schedule another game for you in 2031. Take it or leave it. And because they need to play that game again, because you need to have these good relationships with these bigger schools, they're going to take it, and then suddenly for fiscal year 2021, you got a huge budget deficit, right? That's one big risk. The other thing I think it's important to realize is that most of these group of 5 schools are under-enrolled, and they pay a lot of their athletic budget in student fees. So if, because of Corona, if your enrollment dries up, if you have fewer students coming to campus, paying for dorms, enrolling, every one of those kids that doesn't show up is like an extra $600 that your department doesn't have. And if you're a school in the MAC, or if you're a school in the Summit League, or one of these D1 schools that doesn't sponsor football, that's most of your budget. And those are the schools I think that are going to be facing the biggest challenges. And I don't necessarily know if that's going to mean too many FBS schools reclassify, but at the FCS or lower Division I level, if that pushes you into a different league, if that pushes you to drop a bunch of sports, maybe for some of these HBCUs or some of these really poor schools, maybe that means you go to Division II. I think all of that stuff's on the table.
You bring up a couple of things that I wanted to touch on because I always try to bring it back to where I live.
Sure.
Because one, I know the most about that, and two, I'm invested here, right, in Tulsa.
Yeah.
So Oral Roberts is in the Summit League, but they don't have a football program, right? They're proud basketball, track, and baseball, among other things, right? So I wonder already what's going to happen to them and their athletic program, which is already kind of teetering. But more than that, you brought up this idea of reclassification and then touching on HBUs. Great book by Dr. Derek E. White called Blood, Sweat, and Tears, the story of FAMU football.
Book.
Yes, phenomenal. One of the things it touches on is why the HBCUs ended up going NAIA FCS as opposed to Division I, because at the time, NCAA is dictating who gets what game on national television, and you got this guarantee amount of money, right, that you're going to get if you go to the FCS level, which ends up being, a death knell for so many programs. And I'm thinking about that right now in that if you have to reclassify, like let's say Morehouse, who just said, hey, the hell with it, we're not playing football. But no, this is the house, and we like football, but it ain't who we are. What are the odds that we get closer to this idea of haves and have-nots? Because let's take Oklahoma and Notre Dame, 2 blue bloods. You got one positive case between the two of them over the last 2 testing periods. They also bring in the most money among the top percentage. I've been against this idea of, hey, let's split them up even further. Let's have a big college football national champion. Let's have a small college football national champion. Let's have an FCS and an NAIA and a Division II. It feels like we're just going that direction. And more than that, are we giving up the con completely? Like, no, that is what I bare my teeth at that, because I'm going, if you guys push these kids out here to play football without ever acknowledging the money is more important than the morality here, you have given up the con on all of this, and anybody that doesn't let you slide on that's a coward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hit that last thing first. We'll kind of go backwards.
Okay.
Like the con's given up. Like I don't think anybody can look at this, not just what's happening with Corona, but what's happening in Congress with name, image, and likeness. What's happening with some of the arguments the NCAA has been making in court. It's pretty clear. The only reason any of this is happening is to protect broadcast television revenue. It is for the checks. It's not about health or safety or preserving the student athlete experience. And like anybody who tells you otherwise is just wrong. Even though I think there are a lot of individual administrators and individual schools that really do care about student athlete welfare and mental health. We're trying to play football right now because everybody needs the football money. And the politicians need the football money, and the bar down the street needs the football money, and the hotels need the football money, and the kids aren't getting the football money. But like that's definitely a thing. Like don't let anybody tell you different. To the point about a formal splitting away and everything. Before Corona, when I would talk to presidents and athletic directors and academics about this, because it's a really popular message board trope, right? It comes up on the internet every offseason.
Right.
The feedback I kept hearing was it's really not that likely. And a big reason for that is if you're Oklahoma or Notre Dame right now, it's not 1968 anymore, right? Like Oral Roberts can't prevent you from enacting legislation in the NCAA that you want. You have autonomy. You basically get to do whatever you want within your own league or within your own peers, financially or rule-wise. But if you break away, that means you don't have an NCAA basketball tournament anymore, and you don't have the other NCAA championship events. And I think everyone really understands the NCAA is terrible at a bunch of things. They're really good at hosting tournaments. And if you just have the top 70, top 80 schools, that basketball tournament is not as profitable because people love to gamble on the NCAA tournament, and they love to gamble because they want to see, or maybe not Oral Roberts specifically once they learn a little bit more about him, but a bunch of other small schools beat big schools in those first two rounds. So there's some real pressure to stay. Now, what that means in a post-corona world, that might be a little bit different just because the medical standard of care is going to vary a lot when you are a $190 million athletic department and when you're a $30 million athletic department. It's one thing to kind of like fool everybody to pretend that you're playing the same thing in basketball. It's another thing if there's like an actual contagious disease risk. And so maybe that will spur a couple of other changes. I think the other thing I would think about here, specifically in your neck of the woods, that I might be a little bit worried about for some of these schools is commodity pricing. Which is not typically something you talk about when you talk about college football, but a lot of these schools throughout the country are really reliant on one or two industries for their donor base, right? If you are UNLV, the people that cut checks to UNLV, they work in gaming or they work in hotels or they work in tourism. And so if something happens that hurts that industry specifically, that hurts UNLV more than it hurts Ohio State because, and I say this as a son of Columbus, ain't nobody going there for tourism, right? So if I'm Tulsa and I'm already a pretty small school and I have a bunch of my alumni who work in oil and gas, whether they're petroleum engineers, whether they're like sales or marketing or project managers for a big oil company, and I think Tulsa has a bigger percentage of those people than almost any other school, although I know it's a big thing in Oklahoma and it's a thing on some of these other schools. And oil's going for $20 a barrel. They don't have money to give to Tulsa. So that is going to change a bunch of short-term situations here too. There's all these small schools are facing different kinds of challenges, but they're all facing the same. They're all facing challenges generally, and that will force them to make some difficult calls.
Oh man, and you want to talk about like the leadership at these places too, because I went to the University of Tulsa. It's my alma mater. I master's at OU, and then couple of years at Oklahoma State, but I bring that up to say I'm very much watching it because one, it's my city school, two, it's my alma mater. We got an interim president who's taken over in the middle of a pandemic, but also is not necessarily, at least outwardly, the biggest sports fan in the world either.
Yeah.
And it's $41,000 a year to go to TU, right? It's not cheap.
It's not cheap.
It's not going to get cheaper. To your point about fees, but what I think about now. And I would love to get your perspective on this from the standpoint of having to run, an institution. Where's the Harry Stamper? Okay? Where's the guy that you called up to fix the drilling machine that you incorrectly put together, who asks, what's your contingency plan? And you tell him you don't have one. And he gets pissy about it. And then he goes to a rock that's hurtling toward Earth, drills a hole in some substance that nobody'd ever heard of, that's the hardest thing that anybody's ever come across, drops a nuke in it and hits a button to save the world. Where is that person? We don't have that person in college football, and I'm getting pissy about it because, I've been saying, as I do my show, I'm a wartime sports talk show host. I will come up with something to entertain you. I will come up with news to talk about, analysis to give, and we will do this because I love that, right? It's get it how you live. And I'm looking around at so many of these dudes that make millions of dollars that are supposed to have answers from me right now who are going, I don't know what to tell you. And I'm going, do you not know what to tell me, or are you a coward?
It's driving me crazy. We got to be honest here. This is a problem not just for college athletics. This is a problem, period. We are in this situation right now because we've had university presidents who've been afraid to take bold choices because they don't have the political capital to do so. We have conference commissioners who are doing the same thing. We also have governors. We also have senators. We also have mayors who had the opportunity to take potentially more bold containment action for this disease and did not do so. And that's not just an Oklahoma issue. That's a national issue, right? And even some of them, I think, privately would tell you, yeah, I wish we had enacted a statewide mask order, but I don't have the political juice to pull it off because then the militia is going to come on my front steps. And in some places you can do that, in some places you can't. And because so many different people have kicked the can here and said you're on your own individually, for individuals who don't have that same information capacity to mitigate their own risks, now we're in a place where there aren't any good decisions. We don't play football right now. That might mean a financial apocalypse for certain schools. And it's going to mean a lot of people lose their jobs and a lot of students and a lot of kids lose professional and athletic opportunities. If we play, people are going to get sick, and we're probably going to face financial catastrophes as well. We can shut everything down at this point, and if you don't have some other help here from the feds or from somewhere else, it's going to be an economic calamity. We're already staring down the barrel of some severe higher ed problems where I'm talking like schools are going to straight up close kind of problems, particularly, and I think in Oklahoma and in Missouri and in Arkansas, you have a lot of Division III and NAIA kind of schools that are at risk. Right. Some of these things we could have prevented in May. We didn't. There wasn't somebody who just said we need to do some things here, and so now it sucks. And it's really, I think, laid bare. To your earlier point, there's nobody really in charge of college football. And in some ways, I think that's good. It's led to a more entertaining product. This sport's weird as hell, man. And it's stupid as hell. And I say that with love.
Yes.
I like that this isn't the NFL, but it also means that this particular kind of problem, which calls for unified action across lots of different constituencies, isn't possible for them to solve. And now it's early July. And if there's a good option on the table, I don't see it.
Man, that part of it also is wildly infuriating to me, but I do want to speak to this. I have been loud about Black Lives Matter and about this conversation in race as we are having it across the board, right? Particularly in sports, particularly in my neck of the woods, where on the one hand, I've had Lincoln Riley, who has rarely had a misstep. I mean, it's 3 years in, but rarely had a misstep. I say the one glaring mistake he made was first blocking Austin Kendall's transfer to West Virginia as a grad transfer. I'm going, all right, man. And then he backed up off of that, right? And he claimed to be protecting his program. Fine. If that's your one mistake, golden. We're going to give you an A, right? The University of Tulsa had a couple of their kids lead these conversations in race, football players, one of which is a senior on the team, playing running back. His name is Corey Taylor. Corey had put Phil Montgomery on the spot and said, Coach, I need you to let us talk at you. I need you to let us just vent to you and help you understand where we're at. And to what I've been told, Phil took it, right? And didn't have any bad things to say. And then we got, this Grocco up here at Stillwater that just didn't get it, right? And yet we're still in this place of, hey, did we have protests that are responsible for the spikes, or did we have here in Tulsa a rally that contributed to the spikes? And I'm going, one is a sanctioned event by the government. One is people take it to the streets. The same government that it could have put in place a mask order. And I need to put here, G.T. Bynum's up for re-election in August.
Yeah.
It's hard not to factor all of these things together and go,
Yeah.
Who are we all protecting our own self-interest? Because in March it looked like GT was going to take us on the, it's going to punch me, but I'm going to do what I need to do. And now it's July, and everybody's going, well, stuff sucks. And I want to know that there's a path forward in which I could trust someone. And I'm asking you, as someone who's taking a look at politically and taking a look at college football, who do you trust? Who are you following?
I mean, I trust my neighbors. Okay. I trust my own individual community. Okay. And that's been, one of the benefits, I think. There aren't very many, but what we see here in my neighborhood here in Chicago, where you realize that, look, no one's coming to save you, so we got to take care of ourselves. But, yeah, right. At the institutional level, at the city level, at the college athletics level, I think that there are a lot of individuals who want to do the right thing or are trying to figure out to do the right thing. And at this point, I honestly have a lot of sympathy for some of these school leaders, because what they really need, I think, honestly, is the government or the state or somebody above them to help take some of the worst consequences off the table. Like if you got some of your senators in Oklahoma or in Missouri or any of these other places that said, hey, listen, we know it's not safe. We're going to, create some kind of stimulus bill so you can be able to take care of some of the hotel owners and the bar owners and the T-shirt shop people and your school to tide you over so you can eat a year of no revenue and not have to fire anybody, right? Like a big old college football PPP or something. If you did that, I think that really mitigates a lot of the harm. And, it'll suck to lose a season, but not as many people will lose their homes. You know what I mean? But if that's not happening, I mean, I understand why one person would kind of diddle and try to wait and stall, and now we're getting pretty close to a point where they can't do that anymore, and there's not any good options. So I look at that, and I think it's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate that as Americans we don't really do a good job of always looking after each other and placing interest above ourselves. There's one quick thing I wanted to mention that you had talked about earlier, though, which I think has been really a fascinating and I think really positive development in college athletics over these past couple of months, is that you have seen a lot of black athletes, mostly football players, but not exclusively, I think really explicitly talk about some of the challenges that they experience at PWIs, these predominantly white institutions, and how it's these a bunch of little things where you have these coaches come in, or these professors, or this whole culture that isn't used to being around black people or doesn't work with black people very often, and diminishes their humanity or their dignity, or forces Iowa, I think, is the perfect example to come in here and you have your coaches saying, listen, you can come play football at Iowa, but you're all going to have to look and act and talk and dress like a white Lutheran dude from Cedar Rapids. And for a long time, that was just assumed that's part of the gig, right? And in the 1960s, when you had a lot of football players say this shouldn't be part of the gig, the coaches could just kick them all off. Wyoming. In Oregon State, Wyoming, Syracuse, Penn State, you might have only had a dozen black guys on a team, right? Most of your team is white. You can't do that anymore. And to Montgomery's credit, and honestly, I think to most coaches' credit, they're realizing, hey, some of these things I literally didn't know, right? I went to a white school. I grew up in a white community. My coaching peers are mostly white. I have a power imbalance here. Nobody's really told me that, you're out of line for some of these things. And our kids are struggling. And I think most people want to do the right thing. But there wasn't always a culture and environment where kids felt comfortable really making that explicit. And I'm hopeful for that. And I'm hopeful that if you're a minority at some of these schools that are really white, that you can look at that and use that as an example or a template or an ally to push for a more inclusive environment for the rest of the school. I think it would be difficult to go to a school that's 85% Caucasian and be the only person of color in a classroom and have people looking at you all the time.
Answering the black questions.
That you're an athlete.
Look, you got a question about black folks and everybody looks at you. It's like, wait, time out. Like I tell my best friend, we take Black History Month off. Don't ask us. We don't. No.
Yeah.
No, but no. To that point, it's been a fire, right? It's been a wildfire, and I've been really fortunate to be able to witness it because it took a handful of folks saying something, and then everybody started to say something, and now you can say something like the NFL doing a 360 on Colin Kaepernick, dog. Like or 180. on Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
I didn't see that coming. All right. I need to know, how has it been for your first 4-month foray into publishing this newsletter?
I picked a hell of a time to do this, right?
Right.
So let me tell you a little bit about Extra Points. I've actually been running Extra Points for a little over a year, but most of that was on the side. I still had a full-time job at Vox Media. I ran all of SB Nation's college team brands. But in April, they let me know, hey, we're putting on a 4-month furlough, and then they just bought me out.
Okay.
So I realized, okay, I don't have a job anymore, and I want to keep writing. I love college athletics. I have a little bit of a beat. I've been writing and studying some of these off-the-field issues. I know a little bit about higher ed administration, and because the economy is going to be the toilet, I'm not going to get another media job. I'm not even going to be able to get another marketing gig, right? Like, if I'm going to do something, it's got to be me. So I decided to really try to make Extra Points my full-time job. It publishes 4 times a week now. You can get it for free for 2, but if you want to get every single dispatch, it costs $7 a month, or you can get $70 for the year. And to be honest, it's gone better than I expected. We've got a little over 300 people now that are paying for it. You've got over 2,000 who are on the free mailing list. We've got athletic department personnel from most Power 5 leagues and several Division II and III conferences that are subscribers, and a couple other sports business professors. And I can see this pathway where it might work. And I wish I wasn't doing it now. I would feel a lot better about asking people for money if I knew all my readers had jobs. Like, I'm trying to meet people halfway, and if their employment situation changes, or trying to be accommodating and help them out and everything. But also, if you don't have sports, the non-sports story is the only game in town. And I can tell you, I've been writing about those for a while. Like, I have sources. I understand this world pretty well. I wish it wasn't happening like this, but maybe at least selfishly for me, there might be a few silver linings in it.
No, I've found it to be wildly beneficial to me personally. I mean, I dawned on me that I had read what you were telling me about in your newsletter about endowments, and I'd forgotten it, and there you are to jog me. But also more to this, like, I've come to find out just in my casual, making of the show, people don't necessarily care at large about how the business works until the business comes to their door. And I'm going,
yep.
Yo, man, if you knew how the business worked before it got to your door, you get to avoid the business coming to your door. And that's how I'm looking at your newsletters. It's really done a good job of filling in gaps for things that I thought I already knew, or educating me on things that I, like, for instance, how much of Stanford's endowment is not liquid, and where does that money go? And that's really what I've been focused on and really interested in here of late is, okay, where does the money go? Like, to know that Ohio State gets, I believe it's like $45 million last year from the television revenue, and the Big Ten pulls in like $962 million, 2017-18. Okay. To know where that money goes, I think, is the most important aspect of all of this. And when I'm looking at, coaches' salaries, and I'm looking at support staff, and I'm looking at folks that are going to lose their jobs, am I wrong to think, especially as you put this newsletter together, most of this money is being paid out to like 4 people?
It depends on the school a little bit, but yeah, it's not uncommon if you look at the money for salaries.
Okay.
That it's going to 8 or 9 people at the high end, right? If you're at a place like Michigan, you might have 300 people on the athletic department payroll, and a lot of it's being spread out. But generally, your head football coach, your athletic director, your men's basketball coach, and your women's basketball coach are going to take up a disproportionate share of that salary pool. One of the things that we're working on this week, and we're going to share some other information about, is where some of the rest of that money goes. Yeah. And a lot of athletic departments pay a lot of money to use consultants. They pay a lot of money to use search firms to help them hire people. They pay a lot of other outside entities to help them run parts of their business. They have to spend a lot of money on facilities. And then you kind of run into some trouble trying to track everything, because schools don't have standardized accounting structures, and how they account for how much game day actually costs, or how much they're actually spending on recruiting. It varies a lot from school to school. Like, I don't look at this like, my thinking is, I don't need you as a fan to have a CPA, right? And master every little tiny bit here about accounting. But you're right. Understanding a little bit about how the business works, one, puts you in a stronger position when the business stops working, when it comes to your door. But it also helps you realize how much of that business stuff shapes how good your football team actually is. It's that business. It's that investment from the state. It's that investment from the entire university. It is the demographics of where high school football players are going and moving and where they're investing in high school football. That shapes whether Oklahoma is good at football. Oklahoma has benefited quite a bit, I think, from population trends shifting from the Great Lakes and the Northeast and the Midwest to the Sun Belt. That's a Big 12 football story. And these are the kind of things that I like to write about. I'm really passionate about it. Not every single one of them is this accusatory, like scandal kind of thing, but these are the things that are interesting to me. And I hope they're interesting to other people too.
No, man. As soon as I started to learn that the Alabama university system is built on Alabama football, like as a bedrock, I was floored. Because like you growing up, you're thinking university stand alone, football team is just a football team. Nah, man. Yeah. If Alabama ain't good, ain't nothing in Alabama good.
No, and Alabama is such a perfect example of this because. Like the Alabama university system has a really, really good medical school at UAB. They do important medical research. They have a pretty good regional law school, but they're really dependent on out-of-state student recruiting. They need kids from Georgia or even from the north to enroll there because the state of Alabama doesn't produce enough college students who are willing to pay Alabama money and can make Alabama test scores to go to that school. And their ability to do that depends on football. Their ability to raise money depends on football. And that's not true for everybody, but for a lot of SEC schools, that's the case. Like for Gonzaga, like that school literally exists because of men's basketball. You don't hire Mark Few, that place might literally be closed. Like there are definitely even good schools that really fall into this group.
Golly, man. Oh, no. See, if you haven't subscribed to Matt Brown's Extra Points newsletter, there is a link in the description below. You can follow him on Twitter at MattBrownEP, doing outstanding work. And man, yeah, this is fascinating. This is fun. I sincerely appreciate the time, Matt.
Hey, anytime, man. I'm happy to do it. Friends, if you stick around this week to Extra Points, there's going to be an Oklahoma State story later in the week about our mulleted friend, Mr. Gundy. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but you may be interested, particularly if maybe you are not his biggest fan. You might find some of the correspondence I'm going to share with you kind of interesting. Listen, it's been a pleasure, man. I'm happy to chop it up with you anytime.
Right on.